After 3 years of building what I thought was a solid, unshakable relationship, I found myself kneeling on the edge of a scenic park by White Rock Lake in Dallas, Texas, holding a $7,500 diamond ring in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The late afternoon sun was warm on my back. The breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, and a few ducks were gliding across the water. I had rehearsed this moment at least 50 times in my head, what I would say, how I would look into her eyes, how she would smile through tears before saying, yes. But none of that happened. Instead, Melissa looked at me with this stunned, almost pained expression. She didn't laugh or cry. She didn't say, "Oh my God," or reach for the ring. She just took a deep breath, and with a steady voice, said, "No." It was like the world froze. I could hear the distant sound of kids playing by the swings, but everything around me blurred. We stood there for a few seconds that felt like minutes. Then she helped me to my feet, holding my hands as if to soften the blow, and told me she wasn't ready for marriage. She needed more time to find herself and focus on her career. My chest tightened. I nodded, trying to hold my composure. But inside, something cracked. That night, while I was still processing the sting of rejection, Melissa posted on Instagram, "Know your worth, Queens. Don't settle for less." It was a pink and gold text graphic, paired with a crown emoji and the hashtag self-love. I stared at it on my phone for what felt like forever, wondering if it was aimed at me. Finally, in a moment of petty impulse, I liked the post and commented, "Kings too." At that moment, I didn't know this single exchange, those 4 words, would be the spark that set off a chain of events I could never have imagined. Before that day at the lake, life with Melissa felt steady, even comforting in its predictability. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of Dallas, about 15 minutes from downtown. The rent wasn't cheap, $1,650 a month, but we made it work. Every morning, I'd be out the door by 7:30 a.m., headed to my job at a mid-sized financial firm. Melissa would leave about an hour later for her position at a digital marketing agency. Our evenings followed a familiar rhythm. She'd text me on her way home, asking if I wanted to stop for groceries or just use what we had in the fridge. We'd cook together, nothing fancy, just roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, maybe a salad, while the TV played softly in the background. After dinner, we'd settle onto the couch, sometimes watching reruns of old sitcoms, other times diving into whatever Netflix series everyone was talking about that month. Weekends were our escape. We'd drive about 30 miles north to a quiet lake, rent kayaks for a couple of hours, or just walk the trail that looped around the shoreline. Other weekends, we'd head downtown to catch a Mavericks game or try a new restaurant. Melissa had a habit of taking photos wherever we went, sunsets over the water, the two of us holding coffee cups outside a cafe, our sneakers side by side on a hiking trail. She'd post them on Instagram with captions like, "Sundays are for adventures," or "My favorite person." Looking back, maybe I romanticized those years. I thought our life together had a solid foundation, shared routines, inside jokes, a sense that we were on the same team. Melissa's mom would comment on our photos with heart emojis, and her friends often told me how lucky she was to have someone who supported her ambitions. At the time, I didn't notice the small cracks forming. I didn't see how the long hours at work, the endless scrolling through social media, and the subtle shift in our conversations might be pulling us in different directions. If you'd asked me then, I would have said we were happy. We weren't perfect, but we were building something that mattered. Or at least, I thought we were. What I didn't realize was that life as I knew it was already beginning to change, and not in ways I could have imagined. It started with little things I could have easily brushed off if I hadn't been paying closer attention. Around the beginning of our 3rd year together, Melissa began working late more often. At first, it was once a week, then twice, until it became a regular part of her schedule. She'd call or text to say, "Don't wait up, I've got to finish something for a client," and I believed her without a second thought. Our Friday nights, which used to be reserved for us, dinner at our favorite barbecue spot on Greenville Avenue, or catching a movie at the old theater downtown started disappearing from the calendar. Instead, she'd tell me she had networking events with her coworkers. Whenever I offered to come along, she'd laugh and say, "Trust me, you'd be bored out of your mind. It's just shop talk." The changes didn't stop there. I noticed our text conversations during the day became shorter and less personal. Where she once sent random photos of her lunch or the view from her office window, she now replied with quick one-liners like, "Busy RN," or "Talk later." I told myself it was just a busy season at work, that things would go back to normal once the pressure eased. On social media, Melissa's posts began shifting too. Fewer pictures of us together, more solo shots. Her at a trendy coffee shop downtown, her standing in front of a mural, her at a rooftop bar with a glass of wine. The captions read like self-help mantras: growth over comfort, leveling up, independent and unstoppable. I wanted to be supportive, to believe this was just her pursuing personal growth. But deep down, there was a faint unease I couldn't quite name. It was like watching someone you love walk into a fog. You can still see them, but they're getting harder to reach. And at the time, I had no idea just how thick that fog was about to become. By late summer, those small changes had grown into patterns I could no longer ignore. Melissa's late nights at the office weren't occasional anymore. They were happening 3 or 4 times a week. She'd breeze through the door close to 10 p.m., smelling faintly of wine and perfume I didn't recognize, claiming she'd been unwinding with her team after a long day. Our shared routines began to unravel. The groceries I bought on Sunday would still be sitting in the fridge untouched by Thursday. Our Friday date nights, once my favorite part of the week, were now replaced with her saying she was too exhausted or had another industry mixer. If I tried to suggest a quiet evening in, she'd look distracted, scrolling on her phone as if my words barely registered. Even the small acts of affection that used to be second nature between us, her reaching for my hand in the car, leaning her head on my shoulder while we watched TV, had faded. In their place was a polite but unmistakable distance. What hit me hardest was the change in her online presence. Melissa's Instagram, which once featured the two of us kayaking on Lake Ray Hubbard or grilling burgers on our tiny balcony, was now filled with solo shots in designer heels, group selfies with coworkers I'd never met, and captions that sounded like they'd been lifted straight from a motivational podcast. Surround yourself with those who elevate you, or chasing dreams, not people. I told myself she was just going through a phase, maybe exploring a more independent side of herself. Still, there was this gnawing sense that I was being quietly pushed out of her world. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the truth was, the woman who used to share every detail of her day with me was slowly becoming someone I hardly knew. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was influencing that change. By early April, I'd convinced myself that the best way to bridge the growing gap between us was to take a leap of faith, something bold. Something that would remind both of us why we had chosen each other in the first place. That's when I decided to propose. I spent weeks searching for the perfect ring. I learned about cut, clarity, and carat weight, walking in and out of jewelry stores until I finally found it. A classic solitaire diamond set on a platinum band. It was elegant, timeless, and cost me $7,500. Nearly every dollar I'd been saving for the past 2 years. The plan came together in my head like a scene from a movie. I chose White Rock Lake, the same spot where we'd once spent an entire Saturday just talking, eating sandwiches we'd packed from home, and watching the sailboats drift by. I asked her friend Hannah to casually invite Melissa there for a girls' afternoon, never mentioning that I would be waiting. That Saturday, the weather was perfect, 72 degrees, with a light breeze and sunlight dancing off the water. I waited near the edge of the trail, ring box tucked into my jacket pocket, my heart pounding hard enough to feel in my throat. When Melissa arrived, laughing with Hannah, I stepped out from behind a grove of oak trees. The look on her face when she saw me was pure surprise. I walked up, said her name softly, and got down on one knee. I told her how much she meant to me, how I couldn't imagine a future without her, and asked her to marry me. For a few seconds, she just stared at me. It wasn't the joyful shock I'd pictured, it was something heavier, more complicated. She took a deep breath, helped me to my feet, and said, "I'm not ready. I need more time to figure out my career and who I am before I make that kind of commitment." I swallowed hard, nodding as if I understood. But inside, something was unraveling. I'd expected tears of joy, maybe even a hug that felt like forever. Instead, I was left holding a ring that suddenly felt heavier than the platinum it was made of. What happened that night would make the moment even harder to forget. That evening, after the proposal, Melissa said she wanted to spend the night at Hannah's to talk things through and clear her head. I stayed home, pacing the living room with the ring box sitting on the coffee table like some kind of silent, glittering insult. Every time I walked past it, my chest tightened. By 9 p.m., I was trying to distract myself by scrolling through my phone. That's when I saw it. Melissa's new Instagram post. A pale pink and gold background with bold black letters. Know your worth. Queens, don't settle for less. The caption was just a crown emoji, followed by hashtags. Hashtag self-love. Hashtag know your worth. I stared at the screen, my thumb frozen above the glass. My first reaction was disbelief. Just hours earlier, I had been on one knee, pouring out my heart. Now she was telling the world she refused to settle for what? Me? It stung worse than her rejection itself. The public nature of it made it feel like a verdict. Like she'd not only said no to me but invited her entire social circle to agree with her. I don't know what possessed me in that moment, but I double-tapped to like it and typed out a comment. Kings too. It was short, maybe petty, but it felt like my only way to answer without starting a war in the comments section. The next morning, she came home acting like nothing had happened. She brewed coffee, asked if I wanted eggs, and started talking about her upcoming week at work. I kept my voice even, but inside, I was boiling. That post was seared into my mind, and every time I replayed the proposal, it was now paired with those words, "Don't settle for less." We didn't talk about it, though, not that day, not that week. Instead, the air between us thickened. We were polite, but the warmth was gone. Our conversations turned into quick exchanges about groceries, bills, and schedules. She was out later and later, and when she was home, she seemed to be somewhere else entirely. Something was unraveling fast, and even though I didn't know the whole truth yet, my gut told me I was already losing her. About a week after the proposal, Melissa suggested we take a break. She framed it as a way for both of us to reflect on what we really wanted. Her tone was calm, but her eyes gave her away. She wasn't asking, she was already halfway out the door. We agreed she would stay with Hannah while we figured out our shared lease, which still had 4 months left. On paper, it was a practical arrangement. In reality, it felt like the beginning of the end. I packed a few of her essentials into a duffel bag while she moved around the apartment, avoiding eye contact. The sound of the zipper closing was louder than it should have been, like it was cutting through whatever was left of us. The days after she left were strange. I worked, went to the gym, and tried to fill my evenings so I wouldn't think too much. But every time I walked past her empty side of the closet or the spot on the counter where she used to keep her coffee mug, it hit me again. This wasn't just space, it was absence. About 3 weeks into our break, I got a text from Jessica, one of Melissa's friends I'd only spoken to in group settings before. She said she just wanted to check in. At first, I assumed she was gathering intel for Melissa, but her questions were genuine. How was I sleeping? Was I eating enough? She didn't ask about Melissa at all. We texted a few times over the next week before she finally told me something that made my stomach drop. She hesitated, saying she didn't want to meddle, but she thought I deserved to know. Melissa had been seeing another man for months, someone she'd met through a networking connection on LinkedIn. According to Jessica, he worked in software sales, made good money, and liked expensive restaurants. The puzzle pieces locked into place. The late nights, the networking events I was never invited to, the sudden shift in her social media, all of it made sense. She hadn't been pulling away to find herself, she'd been testing a backup plan. The anger that followed was different from the hurt I'd felt at the proposal. This wasn't just rejection. This was betrayal dressed up as self-discovery. And for the first time in weeks, I stopped wondering how to win her back and started wondering why I'd ever try. After hearing the truth from Jessica, something in me finally clicked. For weeks, I'd been walking around with this dull ache, wondering what I could have done differently. But now the fog was gone. Melissa's late nights, her sudden distance, the way she avoided talking about our future, it all had a name. And that name wasn't personal growth, it was betrayal. That weekend, I made a decision. No more waiting. No more break. I pulled out my laptop and began sorting through our shared accounts. Canceling the streaming services tied to my card, separating bills, and changing passwords. The lease still had months left, but I called the landlord and explained the situation. If I had to pay my half until it expired, fine. I wasn't going to share a roof with someone who was halfway in my life and halfway in someone else's arms. When Melissa came by on Sunday afternoon to pick up a few more of her things, I was ready. I had boxed up the rest of her clothes, her books, and even the decorative pillows she loved more than she ever seemed to love me. She looked surprised to see everything neatly stacked by the door. "What's all this?" she asked, glancing at the boxes. "It's your stuff," I said evenly. "I think it's time we make this separation official." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "We were supposed to take some time." "We did," I cut in. "And in that time, you were seeing someone else." "Don't bother denying it," Jessica told me. For a moment, she froze, like she was trying to decide whether to fight or fold. Then she gave a small shrug, as if the truth was too heavy to carry anymore. "I didn't plan for it to happen." I almost laughed. That line, so tired, so rehearsed, was the last nail in the coffin. "I'm not here for explanations. I just want you to take your things and go." She didn't argue after that. She loaded her car in silence while I stood at the doorway, arms crossed. When she drove off, the sound of her tires fading down the street felt like the final chord of a song I'd been stuck listening to for too long. That night, I sat on my couch in the quiet, the apartment already feeling bigger without her energy filling it. For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. The decision was made, and there was no going back. In the weeks after Melissa drove away for the last time, my life started to settle into a strange kind of calm. The apartment felt bigger, the air lighter. I could walk into the kitchen without bracing myself for a tense conversation or forced small talk. Even my sleep improved. I wasn't lying awake wondering if she'd come home or if her phone would buzz at 2 a.m. with a name I didn't recognize. Jessica and I kept in touch, though at first, it was purely friendly. She'd check in every few days, sometimes sending me funny videos or articles she thought I'd like. We talked about music, food, and even our shared love for old Western movies. It was nice to have someone to talk to who didn't make me feel like I was auditioning for a part in my own relationship. About a month later, word started to drift back to me about Melissa. Mutual friends mentioned she was still seeing the guy from her networking events, though it wasn't going well. Apparently, he wasn't interested in commitment, and the dynamic was starting to unravel. She'd post these overly polished Instagram photos with captions about independence and self-worth. But if you read between the lines, you could feel the cracks. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. One Friday night, around 11:30 p.m., my phone lit up with her name. For a moment, I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity, and maybe a lingering sense of closure, made me swipe to answer. Her voice was unsteady, and I could tell she'd been drinking. She said she'd seen some pictures I posted from a recent weekend trip with friends, pictures that happened to include Jessica. "I didn't think you'd move on so fast," she said, her tone teetering between sadness and accusation. I kept my voice calm. "Melissa, I didn't move on fast. I just moved on." That seemed to hit her. She went quiet for a few seconds, then admitted she thought I would come back eventually. She said she believed rejecting my proposal would make me fight harder for her. That it was some kind of test to prove I really wanted her. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. But I didn't. Instead, I told her the truth. That love isn't a game where you test people's loyalty by pushing them away. I said I was happy now, and that I wasn't interested in rewriting history just because things hadn't worked out for her. She cried quietly on the other end of the line before finally saying, "I guess I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." When I hung up, I felt nothing. No anger, no joy, no longing, just the certainty that the chapter was over. It's been nearly 18 months since Melissa walked out of my life for good. And I can honestly say I've never been clearer about what I want, and what I won't tolerate, in a relationship. Jessica and I are engaged now, and planning a small outdoor wedding next spring. We make decisions together, we laugh every day, and most importantly, we both choose each other without hesitation. Looking back, I can see all the warning signs I ignored with Melissa. The subtle withdrawal, the way she tested my commitment instead of valuing it, the belief that rejecting me would somehow make me fight harder for her. What I didn't realize at the time was that love isn't about passing tests. It's about building trust so there's no need for them in the first place. Melissa's Instagram post, "Know your worth. Queens, don't settle for less," still makes me shake my head. But not in anger anymore. The irony is almost poetic. She thought she was avoiding, settling, by turning down my proposal. But in reality, she settled for someone who never valued her the way I did. Meanwhile, I learned my own worth, not by chasing someone who undervalued me, but by walking away and finding a partner who saw my value from the start. I think that's the real lesson here. Knowing your worth isn't about believing you deserve more just because you want it. It's about recognizing when you're being undervalued and having the courage to step towards something healthier. Sometimes rejection is a gift, even if it feels like heartbreak in the moment. If Melissa had said yes that day, I might still be in a relationship where I felt like I was always proving myself. Instead, I'm with someone who never makes me question where I stand. So here's my question to you. If someone you love told you no, would you fight to prove them wrong? Or would you take them at their word and move on?